We are talking Bridge of the Doomed. And this one is directed by Michael Sue and stars Kate Watson, Robert Lasardo, Michael Perry and Sarah French. Now, this in a nutshell, the plot-wise at least, could be described as The Walking Dead meets Predator. Yes, it's a zombie movie with an added element of another creature added to the mix as well. It is a low-budget B-movie, and the setup is as follows. So this takes place early in a zombie apocalypse where it's still pretty much chaos. The military is still barely together, but it's kind of falling apart. The communication lines are down, people are getting killed, but they're kind of still a somewhat cohesive kind of unit, and they're still trying to contain the kind of situation. And this focuses on a particular kind of military outfits that are ordered to go and kind of secure a bridge because they want to ultimately kind of retreat behind it, but use the bridge to come back and obviously try and take back anything that is lost. And if they can't take the bridge, the orders are to destroy it. So it focuses on a group of soldiers who are there to try and secure the bridge. These soldiers run across a group of kind of survivors that are kind of camped nearby the bridge. But also under the bridge, there seems to be some other type of creature that is not too happy with the soldiers being there and wants to eat them as well as the zombies. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works in this movie. Blood and guts. Blood and guts. If you like blood and guts, then this movie might be for you, because I've got to say, the thing that impressed me here is some good practical effects. This movie isn't afraid to pull out those intestines on screen, have the zombies kind of eat them and things like that, rip out throats, all that kind of stuff, with lots of kind of bloody, gooey goodness. So yeah, lots of practical gore here. You know, it's nothing you haven't seen before ultimately, but it is a relatively low budget movie, but it isn't afraid to get its hands more bloody, shall we say. So yeah, lots of practical makeup here. I think the effects on some of the zombies also look pretty good. So the effects in general are, you know, fairly kind of interesting and pretty good. It's certainly, I think, with the gore stuff here, done to a kind of a good standard. Now, the next thing I would say is this is primarily a military kind of movie, at least in regards to our protagonists, and I was quite impressed, considering this is again a low budget movie, how it handled its military characters. And you know, we had to give some concessions in regards to kind of budget, but we do have a couple of kind of like military looking kind of Humvees. I think the kind of the uniforms, the kind of the equipment all looks, you know, fairly kind of like authentic in kind of what they were used. But also I think what really sold me on these characters was their interactions, the kind of the way they are kind of talking together, talking to you know, like up to rank and things like that. I thought was actually handled fairly well. And it's nice to see Robert Lasardo not playing a gangbanger here. He's instead playing a military kind of general, and doing it pretty well, I've got to say. Yeah, but I quite like the kind of the military setup here. It does feel kind of quite, you know, structured in its kind of approach to these kind of like all these people, and you know, our main kind of group of characters are this sort of ever-dwindling, relatively small group of soldiers who are sent to secure the bridge, and they kind of, you know, they're wondering when they're going to get resupplied, when they're going to get reinforcements, but of course, with the chaos and everything, no one kind of really knows, and it falls down to their sergeant, really, who is kind of ends up kind of being the glue that's kind of holding them together. So I actually kind of quite liked the actual kind of the way the kind of the military kind of aspects were kind of put together. I do feel it felt like there's someone who has had some military experience, at least, has been kind of responsible, or at least kind of consulted into how kind of the military kind of structure would work and things like that. Quite often I think in B movies, we certainly things like The Asylum, you know, it's very kind of slapdash, their kind of approach to the kind of military. But here I felt, you know, and again, we have to give some concessions because obviously it's a low budget movie, but I actually think it was done to a good kind of standard. And the acting was a little bit of a mixed bag, but there are some fairly good performances here. And I think, you know, certainly for the majority of the soldiers at least, I think kind of did a pretty good job and kind of made quite believable characters, certainly in their roles. As I said, you've got the kind of the names talent in regards to Lasardo and Michael Perry here. I think doing fairly good but relatively kind of small roles. There's a reasonable amount of action. It's certainly top and tail with a good amount of kind of actions, kind of sequences as well. And as I've mentioned, they are kind of quite bloody. And we have kind of quite a large amount of extras and stuff kind of playing as zombies. One small little detail I kind of liked about this zombie film, and to my knowledge, it's the only zombie film that I think has ever really addressed this. And this is where they address blood splatter. When you shoot a zombie and it's kind of blood sprays, you know, quite often you'll see like blood in The Walking Dead, for example, blood dripping from the zombies and kind of dripping onto our characters, but it doesn't kind of turn them. But here they're like, you know, don't let that kind of splatter kind of affect us and things like that. And it's a thing I've always kind of wondered with kind of zombie films and stuff, and it never seems to be addressed. So I'm glad it was addressed. We have this kind of creature as well, which adds this kind of extra element. We'll touch on that again, but it is there, and it's kind of like, it's not a zombie, it's something completely different. I think the context here, it's living under the bridge, so it's kind of like maybe a troll, I think, but it's kind of some other type of kind of creature which seems to be a little bit more intelligent than the kind of zombies, stealing food and kind of like, you know, dismantling kind of explosives and stuff like that, which adds this kind of extra kind of element here to the kind of the proceedings as well. And I'm going to say it's relatively kind of well shot and everything, and you do have a different kind of locations and stuff, which I think, again, it's a reasonably kind of like, it feels like it's had a reasonable production, at least for a kind of a lower budget film. But let's now transition to what I think doesn't work. There are some things here that I felt were somewhat kind of superfluous and didn't really add much to the film. And there's two main things that I think I would say. One, this other creature. I really didn't feel like it added anything to the film. It's there, and it kills a few people, and it gives us a kind of like a boss one-on-one fight, so to speak. But it never really feels like it adds a massive element to the plot. It's just kind of there to be simply another obstacle. We don't really get much backstory, any backstory for it really. And you can kind of take that creature out of it, and you still have the zombie menace, which is ultimately the kind of the real issue here. And yeah, you get a couple of characters that aren't killed, but I don't really feel it had a particularly big impact. And the other thing is as well that we spent a lot of time with, this is possibly more of the issue, is this group of survivors, which I felt again didn't really add anything because they don't really have much impact on the story. We get Sarah French there's character, who is kind of saved by a couple of soldiers before she gets raped. But the actual survivors don't really have anything much to do with the actual plot. They just seem to be kind of there and are there to give dialogue to our kind of soldier characters, but they never really feel like they add anything to the plot. And again, you take these characters away and it doesn't really affect the plot with the soldiers and kind of defending this bridge. So it seems kind of like superfluous, both those kind of elements. The movie slows down quite a lot in the second act, and this is where we get most of kind of the dialogue between the two groups, the soldiers and the kind of civilians. It's top and tail with some decent action sequences, but the middle act does drag because it's lots of kind of like dialogue and stuff like that, where you don't really feel like it's moving the plot any kind of forward. You know, we have our named actor, so to speak, in the Sardo and Parry kind of disappear for the kind of the middle of the movie, and only have sort of small roles with the top and tail. And as such, you have the kind of like the drama, so to speak, between these two camps of people that never really goes anywhere, never really kind of amounts to much, to be honest with you. For the most part, I think the acting is solid, but there are some performances that are on the weaker side. And I will say, and I mean no disrespect to this, some of the military types are somewhat miscast. That's all I'll say on that. Draw your own conclusions. But I was a little bit, I'm not sure if that's realistic, you know, of a military kind of personnel. Just saying. There are some elements where I think the budget does show through. Some of the kind of the CGI kind of muzzle flashes and things like that. I know there's been a bit of controversy with using kind of like blank rounds now these days. So, you know, maybe you can kind of forgive that. The actual other creature, not the zombies, I don't know if it looked particularly good. I have to say, in actual fact, although it adds a different element to the movie, in a way I think this other creature actually is somewhat of a detracts from the film, because it doesn't add anything. The effects for this creature I don't think are particularly kind of strong, and it's really just kind of leaves question marks about what is actually going on with that. In a way, I felt it would be better off not even having it, to be honest with you. The kind of end fight scene isn't particularly good, and we get a good look at it, and it kind of just looks like a guy in a mask. So actually, I don't think that particular creature, although as I say, it does have this element that isn't in a lot of other zombie films, it kind of isn't particularly good. The actual zombie zombies themselves are better, with the exception of a few zombies that look a little bit kind of poorly made up, I will. So there's a few zombies here that just look like they've got a bit of white grease paint on and things like that. A lot of the zombies look great, but some don't. Some do not. And as I say, there are some acting here. There's choices that are, for the most part, good, but there are a few kind of weaker ones as well. Yeah, so it kind of like it ends up being somewhat of a mixed bag, this movie. I do think it does some stuff pretty strongly. I like the portrayal of kind of the military stuff. The zombies themselves, I think for the most part, work pretty well. Albeit there's one sequence where we have our soldiers kind of like moving, and they literally don't know it's a huge herd of zombies literally kind of more or less next door to them. I think this is the military here. That was the one thing I thought was a little bit stupid in regards to that. But outside of that, it ends up being somewhat of a kind of an action, kind of horror film, zombie action. I kind of forget about that other creature because it doesn't add anything. But it comes across, as I say, as a bit fun kind of B movie. Nothing too kind of like deep or kind of meaningful. But you know, if you like zombie movies and it's kind of, you just want to kind of shoot them up with some interesting kind of like gore effects, check it out. But a few missed opportunities along the way as well. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it, Lee?